thank you for coming to this AViD 10th anniversary event. Please remember to turn off your cell phones and complete an evaluation form before you leave tonight. After the presentation, there will be a brief question and answer period, and following that, Camille will be signing her book, which the bookstore is selling tonight at the front of the room. Please also remember to visit our website to check out all the upcoming AViD and other events this year. Let me thank our sponsors for the AViD series, the Des Moines Public Library Foundation, with financial support from Humanities Iowa, Nationwide, Wells Fargo, Douglas and Deborah West, Drake University, the Iowa History Center at Simpson College, and Hoyt Sherman Place. Now, I was also going to ask for a round of applause for Jan Kaiser, and I think she has disappeared. Where is she? We'll have to hold the applause, but let me just say that Jan is and always has been the driving force behind AViD. Oh, here she is. So now we can applaud for Jan. Jan really is AViD. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to Kathy Holdifer. Kathy's currently a communications professional with the American Cancer Society. She's active in her community, volunteers with the Reading Mentor program, Everybody Wins, Iowa, and is a founding member of the Finch and Rose State Literary Society. Kathy and her husband have 3 grown children and live in Mingo, Iowa. So please join me in welcoming Kathy Holdifer.
Note to self, wear more quiet shoes the next time I go up some steps. Thank you, Sally, and thank you, Jan, and I'm so pleased to be here tonight representing the Finch and Rose State Literary Society. I'm very excited to introduce tonight's speaker and poet, Camille Dungy. I have a biography that I'll be sharing with you of her and a few other little things that I've learned about her since I met her just a little bit ago. Camille T. Dungy is author of Suck on the Marrow and What to Eat, What to Drink, What to Leave for Poison. A finalist for the Penn Center USA 2007 Literary Award and the Library of Virginia 2007 Literary Award. Remember, those books will be available for purchase after the program. She is editor of Black Nature, 4 Centuries of African American Nature Poetry, co-editor of From the Fish House, an anthology of poems that sing, rhyme, resound, syncopate, alliterate, and just plain sound great. And assistant editor of Gathering Ground, a reader celebrating Cave Canem's first decade. Dungy has received fellowships and awards from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Virginia Commission for the Arts, the Breadloaf Writers Conference, Cave Canem, the Dana Award, the American Antiquarian Society, and the Sewanee Writers Conference. Did I say that one correctly? Once the writer-in-residence at Rocky Mountain National Park, Dungy has also been awarded fellowships and residencies by the Corporation of Yaddo, the Virginia Center for Creative Arts, the Norton Island Eastern Frontier Society, and the Ragdale Foundation. A graduate of Stanford University and the University of North Carolina, Greensboro's MFA program, Dungy is currently Associate Professor in the Creative Writing Department at San Francisco State University. Her poems have been published widely in anthologies and print and online journals. And I'd also like to share that it is with pleasure that Camille is back in Iowa. She was brought here at age 15 from California and says that landing in Iowa City was one of the luckiest things of her life. And graduating from West High School, is that correct, in Iowa City, and then running back to California to share the wonders of Iowa with all of her California friends. And we're very excited to hear some of Camille's poetry and just some of her thoughts. And after Camille has some time sharing her poems with us, we'll have some question and answer time. Camille does.
Should I be putting these mics on my body? No? Okay. They look very official. So first of all, I just would like to thank all of you who came out on this really glorious evening. I understand that you must be relishing this fabulous weather. So thank you for coming inside for me. And thank you for bringing the wonderful weather. Usually when I'm back in Iowa City, my parents, my grandmother live in Iowa City, and I come back summer holidays or Christmas, which means I get lung scorching heat or lung freezing cold. And so this is just fabulous. I'm really enjoying it. I've been in Des Moines all week, actually, and feel very lucky to be here. So thank you to the AViD series for helping to elongate my stay here, and to all the hard-working people who make public libraries possible in this country. So I thought I would start, actually, with a poem that is in my first collection, What to Eat, What to Drink, What to Leave for Poison, and it's also collected in my anthology, Black Nature, 4 Centuries of African American Nature Poetry. And it's part of the reason that the anthology existed at all. I read this poem and another essay at a conference of American writers, and the editor of UGA Press approached me and said, you know, I never really thought about African American writers writing about nature. Do many of you do that? And so I pulled together over 90 poets and about 180 poems from 4 centuries to show that we've been doing that for a very long time. It's a little taste of the California that I keep running back to. Language. Silence is one part of speech. The war cry of wind down a mountain pass, another. A stranger's voice echoing through lonely valleys. A lover's voice rising so close, it's your own tongue. These are keys to cipher. The way the high hawk's key unlocks the throat of the sky, and the coyote's yip knocks it shut. The way the aspen's bells conform to the breeze, while the rapids' drums define resistance. Sage speaks with one voice, pinyon with another. Rock, wind her hand, water her brush, spells, and then scatters her demands. Some notes tear and pebble our paths. Some notes gather the bank we map our lives around. Thank you. So I have the special pleasure today of having my cousin in the audience, my cousin of my mother's, and they run around together more like they're sisters than cousins, so it's nice to be able to have her, and I have to behave tonight because she'll report. But I thought I would read a poem for her about people she knows. It's about my grandparents, who at the time of my grandfather's death, they had been married for over 65 years. And the poem that I'm about to read is the story of how they met. And they met at my cousin's alma mater as well. And what you might need to know is that Alpha Phi Alpha is the oldest fraternity, African-American fraternity in the country. And I tell you this because the title of the poem is At the Alpha Phi Alpha Ball. He warned her once, and then a second time. He'd torn one girl's dress, scuffed another's shoe with his black soul. He had no ballroom legs at all. But she'd had enough of talking by the punch. Her eyes waltzed the body dark parquet, and he knew a third denial would be far worse than tripping her brightness across the floor. So Thornton took her hand. The others had not learned patience, teaching brothers 5 in all to dance. But this girl taught his arms where they belonged, his left hand soft against her palm, his right hand dreaming through fabric to her shoulder. She taught him what it means to love a moving body. When I started writing the poems in What to Eat, What to Drink, What to Leave for Poison, I had moved to Lynchburg, Virginia, which was a city where my grandfather had had his first church and his first academic teaching position, and where my mother and aunt were born. And then they left in 1951. And if you know anything about the American South, you might know that that was not the best residual memory period to have left behind, right? They moved to Kansas and then Chicago. And my grandmother, who was a good preacher's wife and had nothing bad to say about the world because it would all be put right in the Lord, had a lot of very bad things to say about Lynchburg, Virginia. And I was moving there. I'd got my first tenure-track position. I was the second African-American person to get a tenure-track position at the school where my grandfather was not allowed to use the library. And so they had all these stories, and I started writing the stories from that grandfather's perspective, the Thornton I mentioned. And then I began writing stories about my other grandfather. And then I thought, come on, I'm a good feminist, right? Where are my women? And so I started writing the stories about my maternal grandmother. And then I started running into trouble because my paternal grandmother was a woman I didn't really know very well. And so I ended up having to start doing research and discovering things about family stories, you know, those secretive histories that we don't talk about or that people just sort of think everybody knows. And I dug up and found quite a lot of interesting information. One of the things I discovered was that this grandmother was actually born in Iowa, in a little town called Buxton, which was a mixed-race utopian community right here in central Iowa, from someplace. Dreams are sometimes livable, provided there is property enough. And each house in Buxton had a little plot of land. All the town's employees had a garden, and black folks grew theirs right among the whites. A Negro could make a life in Buxton. And great-grandfather, the village's best blacksmith, did. His daughter was free to pass any old place. This is the youth you knew, and why you knew years, miles later, you'd leave the blackening mill town of your marriage. You found a town with promise, moved your sons into its white district, wouldn't let them swim in the mud hole they called the colored pool. So I finished this whole book, 52 rogue sonnets about people who really existed, my own family, and then figures that everybody knows, Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald, O.J. Simpson, Eve from the Bible, you know, people you can follow up on. And, and I thought, I don't ever want to write about somebody who really existed again. That is an incredible responsibility and pressure. And so I'm just going to make people up. And so in order to do that, I went back a century. And so I set my next book in the mid-19th century, again in Lynchburg and also Philadelphia, which was my personal escape route. I would run up I-95 and go stay with my friends in Philadelphia. So I understood the lure of running away to Philadelphia. And so I set this book in that scenario and did a lot of research, read a lot of slave narratives, went to archives, visited plantations, did a lot of work to do what I eventually discovered meant writing real people all over again, right? I still had to have verifiable facts and some reality behind these people, even if they were my fictions. One of the ways that I entered into this project was to write from the standpoint of a man who was not from Virginia. He was not born into slavery. After the shutdown of the international slave trade, there were about 3 ways that you could get new slaves. You could smuggle them illegally, you could breed them from the domestic stock, or you could kidnap black people from the North or California or Ohio, other places, and bring them back. And so this character, who is a man named Joseph Freeman, was the victim of that final acquisition process. And he was stolen from his street in Philadelphia one day. And part of why I wrote him was just the perspective that he was able to give as somebody who was not from this culture, but very, 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 very quickly had to learn how to make do. So I'm going to read some excerpts from a long poem called From the Unwritten Letters of Joseph Freeman. February 1841. Melinda, I've been preparing to write. That peculiar girl named Molly, who has a bit of liberty in the house, has said she'll find some paper. I have practiced mixing charred wood with water and have managed to shave a twig so one end nearly resembles a nib. But tonight, Lila got caught up under the good doctor's whip for such a little offense. I am frightened. Dr. Jackson brought in a new troop of slaves today. A boy of 13 among them had the welted cheek that speaks of a driver's dissatisfaction. Lila put a poultice on to ease the swelling, but Jackson wants the boy to understand his place and thinks a scar will help. Lila's back and neck and arms have 30 new wounds to replace the one she thought to heal. Melinda, how is Jacob? Ever yours. February 1841. Do you ever start at night believing I might be dead? I leave my body sometimes, Melinda. Is that what dying is? Remember how I'd scold you when the stew was thin, believing I needed a thick stock to forge muscle for all the work I had ahead? Your stew would make me big again, Melinda. Sometimes we have to trap, skin, and roast possum, rabbit, snake, and squirrel. Except for that, I have swallowed naught but salt pork and coarse meal in all my days away from you. But I work just fine. Ever your beloved husband. December 1843. William is the name Smith matched to my description when he shipped me from the Wilmington slave pen to the Richmond consignor Jackson bought me from. So I am William, though it took more than one whipping for me to remember it. There is a woman keeps the kitchen here, prefers we call her Auntie. She's been called so many names she most forgets which one means her. I trust Jacob is getting on in school just fine. I was, at his age, learning to carry myself with the pride of a freeman. It's been many years since I've been able to answer any person calling me by that name. And Jacob, can he remember his father? Please hug him for me, Melinda. I am ever your husband. November 1845. How many lived on our alley in Philadelphia? There, this room might accommodate a bed and 2 chairs. But here, we are 3 men, 2 women, some potions, and a girl. We sleep in turns. Marlowe often walks the woods at night, his eye out on the traps for all of us. Dolphus still sleeps in the smithing shop and steals everything else before dawn. Just last week, we bore the tread of a muzzled goat and 2 hens he brought in from a neighbor's farm. Our field sweat adds stench to the store of bones, feathers, brews, and herbs Lila claims can cure the women on this place. Sadie, who Lila never tried to stop herself from bearing, sleeps with her body wedged behind the door. Molly swings it in her side each night when she turns up to sleep after Miss Amy's laudanum kicks in, and she races the conch call to the house in the morning. Even Lena, who had a well-built cabin of her own when she lived on the place, push 4 babies off her tit to make room for the doctor and for Miss Amy's boy. I wonder, Melinda, are your wages enough since I went away to satisfy the rent? Yours in tribulation. December 1847. The doctor's had his eye on Molly since he caught her listening while the tutor drilled his son on Greek. She says the boy translates slowly. On a war now, his spoiled tongue has spent 2 days flogging some warrior's impenetrable shield. Molly showed me yesterday what a heart looks like. Traced it in the dirt that is my bed, my stool, my desk, my cabin floor. I miss you, Melinda. I miss feeling the little skip your heart took sometimes, so I know the pinch that came along with the stutter pains you. Molly is a smart girl, though brutal in her zeal. She's quicker than a butcher to find cause to wield a knife. I am certain the doctor will lapse in his vigilance soon enough. Then I will chance to capture on the page one of these letters. May God be good and grant so large a prayer. Yours. Survival. The body winnows, the body tills. The body knows sow's feet, sow gut, night harvested kale. The body knows to sleep through welted dreams, to wake before the night succumbs to morning. Wheat, wheat, tobacco, corn, the body knows. No stopping. No sinking down. Like a branch floats on water, the body does not go under. Like a tree seated among dark rock, the body leans where it must or fails. So that's a little taste of Joseph Freeman. The book is arranged something like a novel in verse, where we meet several characters, 6 characters in all, and many of them are paired up in greater or lesser positive connections. Let's put it that way. So in a second, I'm actually going to introduce you to Melinda, who we meet at the very end of the book, but just because those poems were sort of so heavy, I will read a poem that has a little bit more exuberance in it. There's a set of lovers in the middle of the book who are young and right there next to each other. Sunday morning. Desire swung like that, like her legs in procession, like perfume from a censer on its linked chain, heavy as smoke in the hold's light. Desire. A church, a cathedral, the body in that robe, the robe sash swinging, the progress through the sinning body to the sacred spot. A man kneeling, a man with head bent, a man lifting his prayer to a woman. Desire, 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 grant us grace. So that poem was from the point of view of a guy named Shad who falls in love with Molly, the one who was brutal in her zeal. When I first started writing a lot of these poems, then I would take them to different workshop environments, and I would write these poems that have all these characters in them, and people would say, I want to know more about this person or that person. And so it often happens like that, where I'll write 1 or 2 poems, and then I have to write more and more and more and more to flesh out the ideas that I have in the individual poems. And then the next question always is, why don't you write a novel? And the answer is, I don't know. I do. I think, okay, this is it. I've got the great American novel finally, and then I stand up and I've got 18 lines. Here we are at the end of the book, finally meeting Melinda. Ring hand. The nail of the thumb I dropped the stew pot on purpled, died, and years ago grew back, awkward now, twisted. This son of mine, my Jacob, was just a toddling boy the day I lost hold. I was readying myself to prepare the meal, expecting Joe back from the butcher, when Sally Turner came instead, supposedly to comfort me. Joe is tall and lean and skilled at laying brick. A man like him would fetch a good price in Virginia. Had my thumbs healed correctly, my hand would bear no mark, but Joe would still be slaving. Jacob is dreaming of marriage. He covers his stained palate every morning, but I know he'll be gone in a blink of years. Still, I can remember nursing him. And I can remember, because he could not be kept away, Joe sitting by me. I'd let him hold my hand, kiss the palm and every finger. I'd smile a wife's smile when he confessed how he loved me, and to prove it, sucked my thumb into his mouth and held it, our communion, against his lips and teeth and tongue. One of the things that happens, it takes me a long time to write books. So this book took me about 4 years to write, and especially considering all the research that happened. And so there was all this information that I discovered. I had some leaves, and I would be able to go for a whole semester and study places. I had this amazing, amazing fellowship at the American Antiquarian Society, where for a month I just got to go and read old newspapers and recipe books and all kinds of paper materials. And it was particularly wonderful because the English literature people and the historians, they had something really specific. Like, I will look for every instance of the word butter in Joseph Cotton's diaries, right? That's all they got to do. And I would get to just go in and say, today I want to look at almanacs, right? Do you have any newspapers from Richmond in 1834, you know? And it was just such a wonderful experience. And so I pulled a lot of these little outside bits into the work. I have these poems in this collection that I call coded poems that work in a way that much language of oppressed people work, that if you hear it on one level, it just sounds like everyday conversation. And if you know what you're listening to, it sounds like something else altogether. Early in the process of researching this book, I ended up in Saratoga Springs, New York, where I was directed to the Rock. And there was this rock on the side of this little blue highway, and it just looked like it had these kind of scribbles on it. The scribbles were, there was a kind of shaky circle with a triangle in it. That was Lake Champlain with a boat. And then there was another kind of square with a stick coming out. That was the schoolhouse. There was a map as you moved through. It was an Underground Railroad map that you only knew if you knew that you were looking at this thing specifically, what you were looking at. So I have this kind of coded language. Within this poem is an advertisement. And so I'm going to actually read you the advertisement. You can hear it pop out as we move through. Friends, be informed, there is on hand, common with calico and fine shirting muslin, olive cotton cultivated by well-remunerated labor, the free goods and labor store. So all over the abolitionist North, there were these stores, kind of like our free trade stores now, where you only had work by people who were paid for their work. Complicit. We'll have to round up all of these free men and send them back to Africa, friends of Mrs. Cartwright's Colonization Society folks who think she ought to be informed, say Liberia is waiting. They asked, what other way? They ask what other chance there is for the colored race to hope for true improvement. Mrs. Cartwright says, for her part, she's glad to know I'll always be on hand in Philadelphia. Quick as it said, I'm sent to market for common with calico, I'll sew into work frocks for her in-house girl, and fine shirting muslin from which I'll fashion shirts for all the little Cartwright men. A year into Joe's absence, I burned my petticoats, flannels, all of Jacob's trousers. I couldn't let the skin he touched touch cotton, and wouldn't let my mouth wet rice. I ate nothing sugared, cultivated a taste for boiled water so I could wean myself from tea. My employer looks to Reverend Finney to learn which acts will prove her faith. She gets by quite all right since Mr. Cartwright's textile ventures have begun to do so well, she told the ladies who came today for coffee. Her help is handsomely remunerated to assure loyalty, she added after I'd removed myself and all their untouched cakes. The production of sugar for a family of 5 requires several months' labor from one slave. I still eat little but greens, tubers, beans, and fruit, the free goods my grocer sells. I suffered through summers in wool and owned no kerchiefs until the committee opened a free labor store. So, you write a book like this. It's full of a lot of really heavy material. It's hard to read from, actually, because it's full of a lot of really heavy material. But one thing that I realized along the process was that I was going to have to write something like a happy poem. Because, you know, people don't go through life just sad all the time. Even if they're in sad situations, people find ways to find joy. And I didn't know how I was going to manage that. But one day at the Antiquarian Society, when I was wandering around saying, I think I'll look at almanacs, I was really curious about the astronomy going on around the time when Joseph was stolen and when her son was born and things like that. There was actually, in the moment when I set his kidnapping, was a major eclipse that covered the eastern seaboard. And so I sort of set it right around that eclipse time. So that was why I was looking at the almanac. But out of the almanac and the back pages was this note that a man had made titled, the note was Observation on the Return of Migratory Birds, and he listed when all the birds had come back. And I just thought, well, there's my happy poem. And so I stole his note and built it into a poem. Observation on the Return of Migratory Birds. I record each arrival, early and late. The birds are returning. The blue jay, March 1. Pigeons and robins, the week before my birthday. I am only here in this last week of April, seeing chickadees wing back and gather nesting. I need the I am when I am witnessing this small and songful resolution, feathered collations ledge perched, tufted shadows skimming our alley's cobbles, and then gone, and then back again. When these flitters return to my block of the Black Ward one morning and stay on into the evening, always, I notice, I smile. So I'm going to close with one last poem, but it's a long poem. It's like that thing that we get to do when we have the microphone. What this poem is, it's a crown of sonnets. I'm going back to what to eat, what to drink, what to leave for poison. I'm reading the title poem from the poem. It's a crown of sonnets, which means that the last line of each poem becomes the first line of the next poem. So if I sound like I'm repeating myself, I'm doing it on purpose. And I'm just reading it because it's spring, and you guys had a brutal winter, and you need a springtime poem. you'll get, so I'm a California girl. I lived in the Midwest, I lived on the East Coast. It always baffled me, every time, that whole winter thing. So, here we go. What to eat and what to drink and what to leave for poison. Only now, in spring, can the place be named. Tulip, poplar, daffodil, crabapple, dogwood, budding pink green, white green, yellow on my knowing. All winter, I was lost. Fall, I found myself here with no texture my fingers know. Then, worse, the white longing that downed us deep 3 months. No flower heat. That was winter. But now, in spring, the buds flock our trees, 10 million exquisite buds, tiny and loud, flaring their petaled wings, bellowing from ashen branches, vibrant keys, the chords of spring's triumph, fisted heart, dogwood, grail, poplar, wine spray, crabapple. The song is drink, is color. Come, now, taste. The song is drink, is color. Come now, taste what the world has to offer. When you eat, you will know that music comes in guises, bold of crepe myrtle, sweet of daffodil, beyond sound, guises they never told you could be true. And they aren't. Except they are so real now this spring, you know them, taste them. Green as kale, the songs of spring, bright as wine, the music. Faces of this season grin with clobbering wantonness. See the smiles open on each branch until you too smile. Wide carnival of color, carnival of scent. We're all lurching down streets, drunk now from the poplar's grail. Wine spray, crabapple. From the poplar's grail, wine spray. Crabapple brightens jealously to compete, but by the crabapple's deep stain, the tulip tree learns modesty. Only blush poplar learns lightly. Never burns such a dark-hued fire to the core. Tulip poplar wants herself light under leaf, never like crabapple, heavy under tart fruit, never laden. So the poplar pours just a hint of wine in her cup, while the crabapple, wild one, acts as if her body were a fountain. She would pour wine onto you, just let her. Shameless, she plants herself and delivers down anyone's street bright invitations. Down anyone's street, bright invitations. Suck 'em, swallow 'em, eat them whole. That's right. Be greedy about it. The brightness calls and you follow because you want to taste, because you want to be welcomed inside the code of that color. Red for thirst, green for hunger, pink a kiss, and white, stain me now. Soil me with touching. Is that right? No? That's not, you say, what you meant, not what you meant at all? Pardon. Excuse me, please. Your hand was reaching, tugging at the shirt of flowers, and I guess I thought you were hungry for something beautiful. Come now. The brightness here might fill you up. Come. Now the brightness here might fill you up, but tomorrow, who can know what the next day will bring? It is like that here in spring. 4 days ago, the dogwood was a fist in protest. Now look, even she unfurls to the pleasure of the season. Don't be ashamed of yourself. Don't be. This happens to us all. We have thrown back the blanket, we're naked, and we've grown to love ourselves. I tell you, Do not be ashamed. Who is more wanton than the dancing crepe myrtle? Is she ashamed? Why, even the dogwood, that righteous tree of gods, is full of lust, exploding into brightness every spring. Exploding into brightness every spring, I draw you close. I wonder, do you know how long I've wanted to be here? Each year you grasp me, lift me, carry me inside. Glee is the body of the daffodil, reaching 2 fingers through the day, feeling her own trumpeted passion, choiring air with hot, colored song. This is a texture I love. This is life. And 2, you love me. Inhale my whole being every spring. Gone winter, heavy clod whose icy body fell into my bed. I must leave you, but I'll wait through heat, fall, freeze to hear you cry. Daffodils are up. My God, what beauty. Daffodils are up. My God. What beauty concerted down on us last night. And if I sleep again, I'll wake to a louder blossoming, the symphony smashing down hothouse walls and into the world, music. Something like the bird's return, each morning's crescendo rising towards its brightest pitch, colors unfurling, petals alluring. That's music. Something like the bird's return, each morning's crescendo rising toward its brightest pitch, colors unfurling, petals alluring, the song, the color, the rising ecstasy of spring. My God, this beauty, this is what I've hoped for. All my life is here in the unnamed core. Dogwood, daffodil, tulip, poplar, crabapple, crepe myrtle. Only now, in spring, can the place be named. Thank you. Thanks so much. So I'm happy. I'm going to go sit over there and answer questions, and then I'm going to go sit over there and sign books. So thank you very much.
And don't worry about getting out of the garage. You're okay.
Oh. We won't let you in. Is that going to be the next blockbuster hit movie, like A Night at the Museum, A Night at the Library?
Yes.
And all the characters are going to come to life? Yeah. That's true.
This is really a reality show.
Right.
Just, well, Camille, I think you've proven a little bit of a point about African Americans writing nature, okay? And what a beautiful way to have the nature part of it become so much the personal part of it. I really appreciated that. It was beautiful and lovely. And as far as the question about why don't you write a novel, and why would you write a novel? This is enough. This is plenty. So I really enjoyed that. Thank you. And it is question and answer time. So I feel funny with a mic. What are we supposed to do, Jan?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
And I stay here like a good girl?
Is that me? Yep. There's another little
Oh,
lapel pin. So you know, grab that little lapel mic. You want this one? Either way. This is great.
I always feel so official when I put these on, you know?
I've put those on other people, but I've not worn them myself.
It's like, can I turn it off? What was the...
Am I on?
On. There's a button that says power on. Okay, can you hear me now?
We didn't rehearse.
Really? Does that work, or we can just pass this back and forth?
Am I on?
Yes.
Is Camille on?
Is Camille on? No. We can hear you though. I know, but they need it for posterity. We'll just pass the mic back and forth.
I like that. It'll be sharing. Well, this is a question and answer time, and I've
jotted down some notes and questions, but I would rather you just open this up and see who would like to start off with a question or a comment for Camille. Yes.
This is kind of inside baseball.
I think I got this on. Yeah. Sorry, that was evil.
Okay, this is kind of inside baseball for teachers. I work with African American students at Paramount, very strong church background, and I'm often struggling to get them to leave some of the church stuff behind and write with a wholer view. To incorporate the church stuff if they want them to write with something wholer. There's a tendency in their poems to wind up delivering, Bible aphorisms, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Good luck. So the question essentially is how, when you are dealing with very churched individuals, and he's saying specifically African Americans, but having lived in the American South, I will not say that that is specifically African American. I lived in the buckle of the Bible Belt when I was down there. And how to get people to leave that, oh, I don't like that one. Okay, this one's just nicer. Okay, how to get people to leave that behind so they're not just delivering aphorisms. And it's tricky. My grandfather was a minister, and so a lot of my material is very deeply inflected by spirituality, by really a religious background and history and training. And then I move it, and I use kind of the Bible as literature, but I don't know that I would be the best religious model, shall we say, because my own spirituality is more of a spirituality than a religion. And so I don't know. I mean, it's a matter of sharing with them, give them Gerard Manley Hopkins, the priest who got permission to write his poems and writes God's grandeur and these amazing, amazing, very religious poems that are poems as well as being praises to the Lord, right? So give them poems by people who are have them read C.S. Lewis, right? People who are really deeply steeped in religious traditions. Many of the early 20th century African American female poets, Angelina Weld Grimke, for instance, writes a lot of very, very deeply religiously saturated work. At the same time, it's very deeply nature poetry, very deeply feminist poetry, etc. So just help introduce them to poets who have straddled that and are deeply religious and are writing about that part of their lives, but are also writing out of other sorts of experiences as well.
I show them.
Thank you.
Well, and I was going to add something. I don't think it's okay.
But
It is. Well, I was interested in the first part of your response too, because I have a background in high school education, teaching language arts, and I like what you said about first clarifying that it could be an African American thing, it could be a Southern thing too. I once was growing collard greens in my garden, and I had a black friend come and say, "Oh, you've got collard greens, is that a black thing or a Southern thing?" And I am neither, so I didn't know. And I like the way you clarified that, it's it may or may not be the African American influence. I taught in Southern Iowa a lot, and the students in Southern Iowa were deeply infused with a strong religious belief and like to express that in their poetry as well. Okay. Mr. Busby.
I enjoyed reading your poems, but after hearing you present your work, I am curious, when you're creating your poetry, do you also hear a voicing starting to manifest itself? Because there's a cadence, there's a lyricism that poetry, I think, should be spoken anyway, not just read. But do these other elements start coming to being as you're writing the words themselves?
So the question essentially is the cadences and the music. Do other elements come in as I'm writing to help it be more musically
as you're
infused?
writing, you also imagine this spoken aspect.
Right. Yes. And as I'm writing, I read out loud to make sure that it works. And I read out loud too often on the page so I can make sure that there aren't unnecessary extra words. And I really am deeply committed to the oral and oral aspects of poetry. One of the anthologies that Kathy mentioned in the beginning, the From the Fish House anthology, an anthology of poems that sing, rhyme, resound, syncopate, alliterate, and just plain sound great. My twin brother and I, if you ever go to the site and see him, you'll giggle, we're fraternal twins. We started that site in 2005 because we thought that it was really important to collect emerging younger generation writers who are out of various kinds of traditions paying attention to the spoken and the oral in poetry, and that poetry on the page needs to come off of the page and really work. So we have this book. It's not spoken word in the way that most people think of it, but the music of the language is really important. I trained as a musician for many years, and much to my parents' chagrin, let it go. But I didn't let it go. I do not believe that that's gone, that the importance of my ear has always been incredibly strong. It actually was my downfall as a musician because I never needed to learn to sight read because I could always just trick my teacher into playing it for me and then I could play it. So that kind of translates into my writing too. It has to sound like something worth listening to again as I'm writing. And so.
I have a sort of a similar question, and it also plays off, I think, what the gentleman asked, because I wonder if it's a good thing to try to categorize people and say you can't express what's deepest in your heart when it comes to things like poetry and words and things like that. So my question was, with today's spoken word movement among the young people, and there's all this kind of the way that they show and the way that they express. How can one learn, or is it necessary, do you think, for one to learn the skill that you appear to show and demonstrate after many, many years of study, and someone just gets up and has a flair? How do you make sense?
And bless that flair, right? Because I tell you what, there's some people who cannot read their poetry out loud. So I am really always happy to hear people who are good at that aspect. But I think that it's important that that poem be able to be read out loud by more than just the person who's written it, right? So one of the things, just like I'm saying with John, with these other students, who just showing them work, I'm going to trump this website again, www.fishhousepoems.org with one H in it. 200 poets reading their work out loud, and you can also read the text, and so you can see what the poem looks like and hear how the different poems present. Several of the poets on the site started out as slam poet champions, right? So they were in that word of spoken word and then made a commitment to really train themselves in the craft of poems on the page. And they have not suffered. Their careers are doing very, very well, right? So they don't lose their edge for having added more. And so just helping these often young people to learn to start to read and to start to move beyond the comfort zone of what they know in their own little inner circle of poets who they kind of bounce off of again and again and again, and pushing and growing means that they'll have longevity with this that they love and that they clearly have so much passion. If they keep doing the same thing over and over again, they'll burn out and it'll start to get. My first book is different than my second book on purpose. My third book, which will be out next July, is different from either of those two, right? And the next book, if there is one, will be different than any of the other three, because every time I write, I have to learn something new in the process. I have to challenge myself and find a new element of the craft that I didn't know how to do, and fail for a little while, and then get it right, and then I have something.
So what I hear you saying is there really is a craft to this whole.
Absolutely. It is all about passion, and it's all about heart, and it's also all about diligence and care and craft and work and labor and discipline. Yeah.
So I imagine that you said that you edit your poems to put them away in your bags, new things to add to them, or new ways to rests within you and then you go back and see it.
So I think, I'm going to repeat your question, I think you're saying that I write my poems and then I go back, and when I revise, I find new things in them, and I go back again and again. Is that essentially what you're asking? Yes.
Some people, like to revise. Teachers, unfortunately, revise.
Yeah, I am a professor, right? And I definitely believe in the importance of revision, because revision is part of the discovery process for me. I am a blurter. I am a person who will just kind of say the first thing that comes to my mind. And it is one of the reasons why I'm a writer, because when I write, I get to edit what I say, right? I don't have to run the risk of whatever I say being wrong or offensive or incorrect or just wrong, right? Because I can sort of pause, go back, sleep on it, fix it. And I can also discover new things that I don't know. We are smarter than ourselves. We are always smarter than ourselves. And I make mistakes or I make revelations, and I can pause. I don't send a poem out into the world. We're not close. They're close. I don't send a poem out into the world until it's sat for some time, usually a couple months. Because after it's kind of gotten cold and the passion, the heat, the like, I just had to get my heart out part is gone, I can sometimes go back and be like, what was that? What was so important with that? And now I can with this sort of colder object, craft it in something that'll be interesting to you, not just to me. What's interesting to me is one thing. What's interesting to you as my reader is the next more important thing. And I am only going to be able to discover the universal, the beyond myself, when I get past the adolescent fixation on just immediate emission out of my body and move into a more mature, dedicated idea of going back and revising.
You kind of answered the question that popped in my head. In addition to a publisher's deadline, when do you know it's time to release that poem to the world?
It can vary. There's some poems. There's a poem in my first collection that took me 3 years to write, and I can trace it from start to finish over several summers and several continents. And it was a major experience. I saw a man run over by a bus, and after it happened, the woman with me said, "You're the poet. You have to write that story." And so it was a charge that I had to do, and it was very hard to do. And I tried to do it from a lot of different perspectives, and it took a long time. And so that I kept going back to and it just wasn't right until it was. And then I knew, right? I nailed it. And part of it is this walking away and coming back. If I walk away and come back a month or two later and I'm like, then it goes back in the draft drawer. If I walk away and come back, I'm like, hey, pretty good poet. Then I can start sending it out. And I just, because especially now with the kind of cache on the internet where things just stay forever out there on the internet, I figure it is worth it for something to just hang out in my drawer for 2, 3, 6 months, a year, before it goes out in the world and hangs out in the world for 30 years, right? I'm willing to have that. I'm an impatient person, but I'm willing to have that patience.
Please.
Do you find that writing poems is similar to what you hear about people writing music or songs, that you sort of have to, like, I've heard that Neil Young, gets obsessed with the song that's in his head and has to get it out. Do you find that happening with poems, or?
Sometimes if I'm lucky, I get obsessed with something and I just have to spill it out. Or like the story I'm telling where I'm like just charged and I have to. But really, so my background, first of all, I come from that kind of family, right? So I come from a pretty focused, dedicated family of people who do things orderly, I never really fit in with them, but they're my family. And second of all, I have this musical training and an athletic training. I injured myself too badly in high school to become the level of athlete that I was on track to being, but I was on track to being that. And that too takes a kind of level of diligence that I had practiced into myself, a focus. So now, where do I put that? I put that into writing. And I sit down regularly, the same number of hours a week over my life, how those hours get diversified. I used to have the leisure to be able to just sit down for 10 hours in a day, right? not so much anymore, and probably a lot less pretty soon, right? So now it's like 2 hours in the morning, and then 2 hours the next morning, and an hour the next morning, and 2 hours the next morning. But I have to just be at the desk, because if I'm not there, why is the muse going to bother with me? The muse will go off and find somebody else, right? I have to be there, and then inspiration can come. When world-class athletes have race day, they make the best times they've ever made in their lives because they have years and years of pool training, even though they're track stars, and weight training and wind sprints and all kinds of things that are boring and dull and muscle memory lessons, so that when the inspiration comes, which is the starter gun at the Olympics, they can be bold, right? And that's the equivalent of what it is that I'm trying to do by just sitting down at the desk every day, doing exercises, playing, trying, sampling, seeing what comes out.
I want to thank you personally for being here as well, and I hope that you enjoy the spring of Des Moines hours. It's certainly much better than the winter. And listening to your geographical movement around this country, I can't help but ask, if at all the likes of Toni Morrison, Zora Neale Hurston, and Alice Walker, and several West Coast writers whose name escapes me right now, Cooper, somebody, that name is Cooper, but anyway, these...
J. California Cooper.
Yes, these writers, have they had any impact at all, if at all, on your style?
I just pulled J. California Cooper out of my head when you said Cooper someone, right? All of those writers, absolutely. I think Beloved is a fantastic book, and so I can't write a 19th century slave narrative without reading Beloved again, right? And paying attention to what she did and how she did it. There's actually a nod that I have in the book to an author named Octavia Butler, who I adore, and Little Master Rufus, who is the little white child on the plantation, is a nod, a little kind of wink and nod to a character in one of Octavia Butler's books. So yes, I read all the time. I acknowledge those legacies. I would not be where I am without my literary family, just as I would not be where I am without my blood family, right, or my friend family. And those women and men who really, really made this world possible and envisioned a world that was different and got books onto the shelves and got people to start thinking about the world that women create, the world that black people create, the world that somebody who is Arna Bontemps, who is a Harlem Renaissance era writer from California, has a view of the world very different than his Harlem Renaissance peers, and it shows up in his work. Alan Spencer, who is a Harlem Renaissance era poet from Lynchburg, Virginia, has a view of the world very different than her Harlem era peers, and it shows up in her work. I've lived in California, I live in Lynchburg. When I write nature poetry as a black person, I'm thinking a lot more in line with Ann Spencer and Honor Bontemps than I am with people writing out of Harlem, New York. Yes.
The topic of geography has come up, and the topic of nurturing a poetical soul in a home has come up, and some friends and I were discussing what does it take to nurture poetry as a culture in a place like Iowa, and obviously people who are here love poetry, and there are many more of us out there, but it seems a little difficult sometimes to have the opportunities and the venues for people to share their own poetry and to hear the poetry of others. And because you've obviously been around the block a few times, are there any strategies that you would recommend that we use to nurture the poetical spirit of our state?
Keep bringing us to visit and feed us like you've been feeding us. Good grief. I'm not sure that this is a baby in my belly and not just a food baby. It's been great. I've really eaten well. I ate today at Django's and this afternoon at the DMAC Culinary Arts School and last night at Mojo's and the day before. I mean, it's crazy. It's been, yeah, it's so good. You should travel around the country as a pregnant woman. People feed you very, very well. It's quite exciting. No, but honestly, having venues like this, having open readings, having open mics, contributing to and supporting literary journals and newspapers, and you don't have to do it every month. Once a year, twice a year, having a festival, because people get tired and busy and they can't come out all the time. And in fact, I live in San Francisco where there's something, 4 events a night, every night of the week, and it's kind of tragic how I have to pick and choose, right? Because I can't live with my family and do the things I need to do in my own life and my own writing and my own work, and also go to all the readings. So it's not a matter of saturation, it's a matter of quality, supporting that work. And I do have to say that the internet has done amazing things for access, that we're still publishing books, and please still buy the books and go to our local bookstores who are amazing and fabulous and are doing local readings and support, and local bookstores still support small publishers, so we need to support them. And also, you know, you can find so much work now on YouTube, and you know, your young people that you're talking about, sit them down in front of the poetry channels on the YouTube and have them watching people give readings, different kinds of readings, so that they can get this feeling. I think it's really actually a very exciting time for literature right now, because there's so many varieties of opportunities out there. There's one more hand.
My question is a follow-up, and that is the exposure to literature and how difficult it is if you have these inspiring young writers to get it published.
Yeah, so you can go to the Poetry Foundation website, poetry.org, and they have this blog called Harriet, and just 3 or 4 days ago, I posted a blog about how hard it is to publish my work. I had a conversation with a very, 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 very blessed young woman poet who I said, I'm really excited that my 3rd book got picked up and is going to be published so soon after I finished it, instead of 4 years after I completed it, like my first 2 books. And she said, don't say such a thing. That's just horror. She thought I had just made up this curse. I was like, no, this is the progression of my work. 4 years after I finished the book, I see them in print. And she stepped back from me like I had some sort of fatal disease. But and so in this post, I talk about what that is, but what that just means patience. Books are long. They're not sprints. It's long. These books are going to be out there in the world forever. After I'm gone, they'll be there. So if it takes 4 years for it to get out versus 2 years for it to get out, if the work lasts, it'll last. And I've had to learn that. I'm still 2006. What to Eat was published 2002. What to Eat was completed. I just read from it tonight, and you just met those poems. It's not a sprint. It just doesn't matter. It feels really, when you're writing, like everybody has to get it right this minute. They have to get in their hands right this minute. It's like art is longevity, and that's what you just have to. It's hard to believe that I'm even saying this, because as I say, I'm an impatient person. But art is about longevity, and you just have to learn that patience.
And why don't we say thank you? We'll have one more question, and you're the lucky one. And after that, when if you want to purchase something of Camille's, or if you have something for her to sign, it should be over there. If you have a personal question, she did indicate she'd be happy to chat.
Happy to answer.
Yes, to tell your work, your books, did you keep submitting them, or did someone come to you?
Yeah, that's the dreamy dream. It happens to some people that people come up to them and ask them for their work. But no, I submitted them for years. I was always the finalist, never the bride, right, for 4 years in a row. And actually always the finalist to very good other writers who have made very good careers out of it, you know, so I'm like, oh, I was bridesmaid for that person, right? And you know, you just gotta stop, you can't take it personally. When my third book was out there in the first round of contests, by that time I developed an incredibly thick skin, right? And I came home one day and had 3 rejection letters, 2 of which were awesome. They were really, 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 really good letters. And I went to bed and I cuddled up with my husband and I was like, I just got 2 amazing rejection letters today. It was like the best thing because I knew that it was a matter of time. Like I learned at this point that if I'd gotten to that point, I've served as a judge enough times, you get 200 poems and you can publish 1. You know? So if I'm getting that letter, the editor really means it when they say, I wish I could have published this, but for whatever reason I couldn't. And if they could have published 5, it would have been 5, but it just for whatever reason, I was the other 4, right? You just have to, that's the way life is. It's narrow, and sometimes you're not the one that's in. But look, I'm here in the space, and it's not so much a popularity contest. So it is a contest, but it's not so much a popularity contest. All right, I'm going to be over there. Thank you so much.